Bonjour, willkommen, howdy, and welcome to a sun-drenched UK at the moment. We're here in the Gloucestershire Steam Extravaganza in South Cerney. It's quite a big show. I've not been here for a very long time, so it's fantastic to see quite a burgeoning military section. So there's lots of interesting bits of kit we can have a look around later. There's also a lot of agricultural stuff. There's classic cars, classic commercials, and of course lovely steam engines. So it's quite a lot to look at and to keep you quite busy. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a quick look. We've got the 106 SR out and we've got the ERC 90. We're going to look at the Hotchkiss in particular, and especially at the engine and any sort of foibles or problems you might have. So if you were thinking of buying, or you're trying to work on, and you're a bit of a newbie to Hotchkiss, let me share a bit of my expertise with you that might help you in the long run. So let's pop on up, have a look at the Hotchkiss and go from there. Hotchkiss M201 mostly. This is the 106 SR. Doesn't really make much difference under the bonnet. It's got the Willys Go Devil engine, so that's 2.25, 2.5 litre side valve engine, and 4 cylinders, petrol obviously. And so what we'll do is we'll delve in underneath the bonnet here and have a look at the salient points, and I'll point them out to you. So on the Hotchkiss Jeep, what you do find is the air filter is over here on the driver's side, being left-hand drive car on the left-hand side, not on the right-hand side as you used to get on the World War II. So therefore the carburettor, which is a Solex downdraft, goes straight across to the air filter on this side of the engine. The top's very, very similar. You can tell this is a post-war engine because you've got these ribs on the top of the head, and also there's the word Jeep. J-E-E-P. Also says Willys, interestingly, and I'll talk about it in a second, but Jeep. Now, Jeep was a word that didn't exist in the Second World War. It came afterwards. It was a shortening down of GP, general purpose vehicle, so they called it a Jeep. So those names appeared when it was used as a trade name after the war. So we know this is a post-war engine. Also, down on the side it says HWOF, Hotchkiss, Willys, Overland, France. So we know it is a French post-war engine. We're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes with this one. You've got shielded plugs. The reason for the shielded plugs was because for the use of radios, so it was suppressing any sort of stray electrical signals, and these are shielded going down to a shielded distributor. Interesting, as I pointed out already, it says Willys. That's because this engine is manufactured under license, or actually came from the US, and is a Willys engine. Also there's the firing order on the top, 1342, so that's quite useful. On the top here is where the water comes out. This is where the thermostat is. This goes across to a radiator. The radiators in the Second World War Jeeps and the Hotchkiss Jeeps were very similar, just slightly different patterning on the top of the header tank, or on the top of the tank itself. It is slightly pressurised. I think it's up to about 4 pounds under there, so I won't open it. The engine's quite warm at the moment. This one's just had a new water pump on the front. This is the oil, I would say filter. It's more of a strainer. It's a very small trickle feed, and there's a cartridge in there that you can replace as you're moving forward. Dipstick, undoing it, it'll show its American heritage, and that is when you flip it over, you can see it says empty and full on the dipstick. I usually use, well, you must really use a mineral oil on these. I just use a normal 1540, depends on what the weather's like, but just keep changing it. That's the whole point, is keep changing that oil minimum once a year, because even if it's sat around, it's not doing the engine any good. So once a year, get that oil changed. Okay, air filter, go back to that very quickly. That's an oil bath filter, so there's oil in the bottom, so you can take that filter out. You don't throw it away, you just flush it out with petrol, wait for it to dry, put it back in, and you're off and running again. We'll look at tuning these slightly in the moment, but let's just finish off looking around this side of the engine. So one of the first things you will notice is you have 2 batteries, because this is a 24-volt vehicle. Nearly all the M201 Hotchkisses were 24-volt. There were some that came out that were 12-volt. Right at the beginning, they were called ETM Jeeps, but this is sort of a stock factory one. Over here as well, then we've got this distributor, and it's an armoured one, and what that basically means is it's an aluminium case and all the gubbins are inside of it. So you've got your coil in there, you've got your points in there, and obviously you've got your rotor arm as well. So it's very similar but not the same as you find on the American M38 Jeep. So sometimes you may find one of these and go, goodness me, that's great as a spare, but they're not interchangeable, they are slightly different. Same with the innards as well. If you take the innards out of one distributor and try and put it into one of these French ones, then you can be asking for trouble. So everything's inside of there. Now, lots of people, and you get to see them on the internet, and people ask me, my Jeep doesn't run very well, my Jeep doesn't start very well, etc, etc, and nearly all the time it's down to electrics, but that isn't where you should not start if you're trying to problem solve with a Jeep engine. First thing you want to do is to check that you've got a fuel supply, and that's really straightforward, and that's by disconnecting the fuel feed into the carburetor, okay, turning the engine over without the ignition on, and check that it's squirting fuel through. That will show you that you're getting fuel into the engine. Then it's checking that the carburetor is actually putting fuel in with the air. So that is by running the engine the best you can, by taking off the top of the carburetor and looking down it and making sure that when you rev, you see a mist, which is the fuel going in. And that's about as much as you can check on the fuel front, so you know that you're getting fuel. If it's still then acting up and it's still not starting very well, then you go to electrical issues. Number one, I would double check first, is the ignition switch in the dash. I'll come around, I'll just show you where that is.
Magnified, or is it?
So you see that one in the middle there, that's pointing vertically, that is the ignition switch. They're not made very well. They've got two bits of cardboard that rotate, or sort of waxed card that rotate on top of each other to make the connection, and they just dry out and they get moisture in there, and then you get corrosion, and those 2 points just won't touch. I've tried taking them apart to fix them, but they just all come to bits. So the thing is, just buy another one. That is, believe it or not, one of the main issues with these is you must check your ignition circuit. Added to that, check that the wiring's not frayed. These are so old now, and they're covered in this sort of rubberized sealant over the wires. Over time that breaks down and crumbles and comes away, and sometimes you'll find that the cabling under the dash is starting to short out, and the way of seeing that is to run it in the dark. Look underneath. If you see rock the Jeep, and if you see any sparks coming out, then you obviously know that you've got an issue there as well. So that's got it from the ignition switch through the wiring loom. Of course, maybe I've overlooked this, but bit of common sense, do check you've got good batteries. So don't get ones that have been sat on the floor for a year, decide to plonk them straight in and can't understand why your Jeep doesn't start. Get them on charge, see that they hold a charge. You want them, these are two 12-volt batteries, they want to be holding 12.3, 12.4 minimum. If they're only at 12 or they're 11 point something, they're no good. Get rid of them, get some fresh batteries in there, because it'll give you start giving you a complete headache. So starting with nice fresh batteries, you know you've got a really good check across the poles, you're getting the right sort of voltage, you checked your switch, you checked your wiring. Now we can start worrying about the distributor. Let's go through the issues you get with that. Inside of here you have a coil, and if you by accident, and I've done this, leave the ignition on for any great length of time, you can put electricity into that distributor when it's not really needing it. And how does that manifest itself? What it does is it heats up the coil, and the coils get hot. When they get hot, they've got a small there's small solder holes in them. If they get too hot, that bursts, and well, the tar inside will start leaking out. But you will just basically break that coil down. So don't leave your ignition on too long. If you've left it on, or you don't know if you have left it on or not, feel the coil itself, and if it's scalding hot, turn that ignition off immediately. In the bottom of the coil, I'll show you here, there's a feed that comes from the wiring loom, and it goes into this particular plug, and that goes inside the body of the distributor. Inside there is what I could describe as sort of a condenser. It's basically the part of the starting system, part of the starting sequence to get that coil excited, and off it goes. Those do fail. Okay, they get overly hot due to maybe the coil being right next to it. They leak, fluid comes out, and it won't work. That's why you won't get your Jeep to start. It will start occasionally when it's cold. As soon as it warms up, it cuts. It won't do it again. The way of telling is to take the top off of the distributor, take the coil out and literally put your nose inside the rest of the Dizzy, and you want to smell for a sweet burnt or oil smell, and that's showing you that you've got electrical issues inside that distributor. Some people have cut away the sides of their distributors to get better airflow in around them. That can do anything but help, but if you've got an overheating coil, you've got an issue that you need to address. Just trying to treat the symptoms of it isn't going to fix it. It's just going to get progressively worse until the thing won't start. What do you do about getting coils? A lot of people may ask. The best thing is to go to a French supplier in France themselves. There's lots of great websites you can go on. I use, and it's only a personal, I use Jeep Sud-Est. You can translate their website into English, order it, and they send it through by the post within days. And then you know you've got the correct 24-volt coil to go in that time. I would get one of those little condensers. That's basically where the 3-pin plug attaches, and that goes up to one side of the points. Okay, so I think we sort of solved those issues with it. One thing to look out for though, and this did stump me once, is over here, this is the fuel bowl, and this is the fuel strainer. Now some of these tanks are quite old and this can fill up, and if you want to undo it, there is a bleed at the bottom, but if you undo the nut at the top, you can take the whole canister off and clean it. You must clean upside, out, inside and around, and put a new gasket in there. I used an old gasket and it was sucking air, and I couldn't understand why when I put my revs down, put my foot down on the Jeep, it just didn't have any guts, and the reason was it was sucking air there. So what we use is a length of pipe, give me a second, and when we're running the engine we basically attach one end to our ear and the other one we listen around the engine, and what we're doing there is we are looking for sucking air to find out where we might have issues. So this one wasn't running that well. I could smell it was a little bit on the rich side, so we've adjusted the idle, which is over here, and this tiny little screw here adjusts the amount of air and fuel when it's sat at idle. We also noticed, which is a thing that might be catching a few people out, the choke wasn't coming fully off. Even though the driver who was pushing that choke knob in, it wasn't actually pushing it off at the carburetor fully. So the vehicle was always running with the choke on. So no wonder I could smell it was a bit rich. It was spluttering a bit when it was idling. So we adjusted that, we screwed that screw right in until the engine was spluttering and backed it back out. And then to check that we were getting the right mixture, what you can do is put your hand or an object over the end of the air filter. By doing that, you're starving the engine of air. So obviously, if it's choked, it's got too much fuel, and you start starving it of air, then that's going to become even more choked, and you'll start smelling petrol coming out the exhaust pipe. Is when we ran this engine a moment ago, and I put my hand over it, we were listening with the pipe, and we could hear air sucking somewhere. So we went all the way around the carburetor to try and find out why it was sucking air. Now if it's sucking air at the carb or after the carb, i.e. in the manifold, we've got some issues, but it happened to happily be just an air pipe that wasn't attached properly onto the top of the carb. So that's really good news. So there's a quick top tips about if your vehicle's not behaving. Obviously I haven't been able to cover everything. We'll be able to do something like that in greater detail. I'm just stood here in a field in the middle of Gloucester, so I haven't got all my tools and my kit and my testers around with me, but I think that's stuff you can do yourself in the field to check that why your vehicle's not starting, why it becomes problematic when it's hot, etc, etc. Okay, a lot of noise around me, everyone's enjoying themselves. We've got loads of got a tractor going past there. So let's get this Jeep started and I'll sort of show you the issues that we had. So it's on with the ignition, we're making sure it's in neutral, and we're pressing the start button. Okay, that's started. Now we're going to simulate what we had before, and that was the choke. So this was started from cold and the choke was out, okay, and then after it was running nicely, the user pressed the choke back in. Now watch as I let go. Did you see it spring back out again? So let's go and find out what's going on. So down here at the carburetor, this is the choke, back here the choke mechanism, and when you pull on the choke it pulls upwards and the choke is put on. Now if you notice, I'm going to press it down, did you see it go down? So therefore the choke's not coming off perfectly. So to adjust that, we would disconnect it, reconnect the wire at a different position. So absolutely, when you're pushing that knob back in on the dash, it's actually switching that choke off. So watch out for that. That's caught me out as well in the past. This pipe here at the back, this feeds the distributor and keeps the coil cool. So that's one of the important things to make sure that that is attached. Because if it's not attached, then your coil is going to heat up. And do you remember what I said earlier about how that's going to cause you a load of problems? So there is this suction, this vacuum that comes off the carburetor that goes into the side of that distributor. You must make sure that that pathway is clear and that that air is being sucked through, or pushed through in this case. Top tip, another one there for you. So to my ear, the Jeep at the moment is running too fast. I don't know if you can pick that up on the camera so much. I think we need to get those revs down. That's sounding like it's at about 1,500. I want to get that down to 1,000 or just below. What I will do is try and back down those revs. You can do that by hand. There's a little grub screw at the back. We'll try and find something, because I haven't even got my screwdrivers here at the moment. So we'll get something in there to sort that out. Okay, that's running at more acceptable level. We just need to rev it a little bit just to clear things out, and then we're just listening. Okay, that sounds good. We're going to go around and we're going to smell the exhaust. What fun. So we're down at the business end now. What I'm picking up is there's still a lot of petrol coming out of that exhaust pipe, unburnt. That popping as well, that's probably what they call the Hotchkiss pop. But certainly if it was popping and banging, then we would know then we've got far too much fuel. But that smells a little bit rich. So we're going to go back, make sure that that choke is fully off, and we'll have to adjust the idle mixture. So we're going to wind it in first of all. And what we're listening for is the optimum running. Right, okay, so that engine's not happy now. That's because it's not getting enough air. So we're going to back this off, about one turn. And if you notice, the engine revs have gone up slightly, so that's perfect. What we're looking for is those engine's revs to be at the highest point we can, just by adjusting this screw. So we're going to back it off a little bit more. Right, yeah, it's not so happy there, is it? Uneven turnover, so we're going to back it back in. There we go. Okay, much better. Looking at the back of the carburetor, there's a little bit of playment in the spindle. That's the shaft that allows the butterfly to open to let more and less fuel in. We need to investigate that. I'd suggest dropping a bit of heavy oil down on those and see if that made any difference to what the exhaust smells like, because it could be sucking air in at that point. I'm sure a few of you are watching this and shouting at the screen saying, but it could be the timing's out. Well, absolutely, it absolutely could. To do the timing on these, on the front, if you can look down in there, you can see the pulley at the bottom, and on that front timing case, there's actually, it looks like a piece of metal wrapped around. That's actually where the marking is, and that's showing you with a stroboscope you should be able to light that up. Some people say, well, how can you use a stroboscope when you're using armoured cables? Easy. Get hold of an old second-hand one, strip off the cabling, and it's a normal HT lead inside. Put your clamp around that. So just have that one of those to one side to always help you do number one cylinder, and you can check your timing. What we can do then to adjust that timing just minutely is we can actually rotate the distributor. So we can either advance or retard the engine by simply moving this. And I think it's a 17mm flat on the back nut, and that can be undone, and then you can rotate this. What I've found on most of the Jeeps I've owned is you usually have this distributor in this flat plane, usually with it nearly touching at the back, the engine block. Very rarely do you find this element further and further down, okay? So they're usually up around here. So it's a good starting point is to put the thing in where it's nearly touching. You can just about get a very tiny little pinky finger down between the body of the Dizzy and the engine block. Do watch out because it's hot down there. So that's another little thing that we can actually do. But again, as I said, we're in a field in the middle of Gloucester, so we're not going to attempt those sort of things. This chap wants to drive home in it, so we don't want to start pulling it apart and seeing how we can make it any better. We've got it running nicely. There we go. The exhaust pipe doesn't smell too rich. We've shown him how to make sure he can manually put that choke back in when he's got the thing running, but hopefully he won't need choke today. And he needs to go back and he's going to drop a bit of heavy oil in and around that carburettor to see if it's sucking any air in by the butterflies. If it is, carb off, carb rebuilt, and go back on. Word of warning, you can buy these. They are unbranded, is the best way of putting it. They are available on the internet, and they come from across the seas, and they are poor. Very, very poor indeed. So if you have put one on, you might get a few months out of it, and you may end up with issues. The main thing is the rubbers that they use inside of them can be eaten away by the ethanol in unleaded fuel. So do be careful if you're buying a carburettor unbranded off the tinternet, sent from a country abroad to fit one of these. It's probably best just to get your original rebuilt. Lastly, last tip of today, and that is around what should I do if I don't use my Hotchkiss every day? To be honest, a lot of them don't get used during the winter months, and then they come out in the summer, and then problems manifest themselves. So there's a couple of really good things we can do if we're going to store one of these for any sort of length of time. And number one is to try and get the fuel out of it, and that is to try and run it disconnecting the fuel line, so you use up all the fuel that's sat in any of the lines. Therefore it can't sit there and start eating away at any rubbers. The other thing to do is absolutely disconnect your batteries, and that is off of the vehicle and off of each other. Even if possible, to take them out of any cold garage during the winter and keep them somewhere warm, or at least wrap them in a piece of cardboard, or even throw some sort of quilt over the top of them, not whilst it's in the engine, and then put those on trickle charge so they're in really good state for when you start it again the year after. I'm just going to give you some pointers if you're new to one of these, and that simply is you want to make sure that you've got fuel in the carburettor, and you do that by reaching in to the fuel pump, which is down here, and on the side is an arm, and you pull the arm up, and you keep pulling that arm up and up and up until there is no resistance, and you will hear the carburettor being filled with fuel. So that means now you know you've got fuel in the carb, which is great. Number two, you get the choke and you pull it fully out, all the way out. Turn the ignition on and press start. Turn the engine over until it catches. As soon as it does, push that choke immediately back in halfway, and then slowly you can take it up on a little bit on the revs, and then put the choke fully back in when the vehicle's becoming warm. The one thing that used to catch me out when I was a new Jeep owner was flooding the engine over and over again, and that was because I was pulling that choke fully out, pumping that accelerator, and I was just filling it up. No good at all.